I just want to invite everybody and encourage you on behalf of the International Society for Organization Development and Change to welcome you to today's webinar. ISODC has just a ton of membership benefits, as you can see on the screen, but one of them, my favorite one, is friendship and support for scholars and practitioners. And we do have a lot of scholars in our organization, which is just a huge benefit. I want to encourage you to go to isodc.org. That's isodc.org for more information, including to check out some of the upcoming webinars we have. We are so excited about this webinar, and I would like to introduce you to a person who has begun this movement of healing organizations in our world today. Raj Sisodia is awakening the conscious business to help save the world, and I cannot think of a more important mission. But before we begin and we interact with Raj, if you haven't shared where you are in the world, that would be wonderful if you would do that. And I'm Kim Barker, and in addition to teaching full-time, I'm also an author and a speaker and the VP of ISODC. So one question is, where in the world are you today? And then another question that we'd love to know is, what perspective do you bring to it? So if you can share where you are in the world. Let's see, I'm trying to. So I'm having a hard time seeing the more recent ones that have been added. So if you could put in the chat box where you are, and also what perspective you bring today. So if you are a student, if you work in HR, if you are a scholar practitioner. Hello, Wendy from Seattle. And Scott from Garden City, and Micah is from West Bloomfield, and Allison is from South Africa. And Grant is from Canada, Victoria, Canada. We have automotive, we have some external consultants. Grant is a business consultant. Wendy's an external consultant with a company that is undergoing a major change. We have an office manager. Students, educators, welcome everyone. This is one of my favorite quotes. Yesterday I was so clever, I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise and I am changing myself. So I met Raj Sisodia in 2013 at the Academy of Management Conference in Orlando, Florida. Dr. Sisodia had just spoken as a keynote speaker, and my colleague, Dr. Eric Sanders, said, let's go meet him. And I was shy, but I said yes, and Raj was so warm and friendly. I'll never forget that. Raj Sisodia is the F.W. Olin Distinguished Professor of Global Business and Whole Foods Market Research Scholar and Conscious Capitalism at Babson College. He is also the co-founder and co-chairman of Conscious Capitalism. He has published 10 books, including Conscious Capitalism, Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business, Firms of Endearment, How World-Class Companies Profit, Compassion, and Purpose, and Everybody Matters. You could initially, if you would please, just mute your microphone, and there will be a time later to ask questions. Wonderful.
That was along with the orange.
Let's see. Raj has written at least 10 books, including Conscious Capitalism, Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business, Firms of Endearment, How World-Class Companies Profit from Passion and Purpose, and Everybody Matters. I show at least one of Raj's 2 TED Talks in every class I teach, and both of his TED Talks are on a playlist that I share with many, including every student in my classes. His message is just that important, and I am so honored that you can be with us today, Raj. And as we begin, can you share with us why you started out the book, The Healing Organization? Why you started out with it, the section on redreaming the American dream? Sorry.
Yeah, hi everyone, happy to be with you. The section of the book that's called Reimagining the American Dream, is that what it's called?
Yes.
The book
Reimagining or redreaming the American dream, yes.
Yeah. I think we actually take a look at American history and we try to understand the roots of why it is that we have come to a place where we are causing suffering in the workplace through the way we do business, and why in many ways our society is also quite divided and fragmented. There's a lot of sort of oppositional energy at work there. And if you go back to the foundings of this country and you look at the 2 things that evolved in parallel, so that the government in the way of governing ourselves, that system, and then in the way of structuring and leading businesses. So capitalism and democracy both evolved, I would say, most rapidly here in the US and then got exported to other places. But each of those really had, I would say, certain blind spots. And some of those were common to the world, but I think they were accentuated over here. And those really had to do with the absence of the feminine. So if you look at the founding of this country, and if you look at the system of government that was created, the federal system, which had states' rights, and then a federal government with certain rights, and then the 3 branches of government and the balance of powers, checks and balances, all of those ideas. A lot of those actually were borrowed from the Iroquois Confederacy, which was created about 200 years prior to the establishment of the United States. And it was a way for 7 tribes in the Northeast to actually be able to live together in harmony. And it was a confederated structure where they shared a common language, but beyond that, each tribe had its own identity, but they had certain things that were common. And many of those elements were, in fact, studied by Benjamin Franklin and others and became part of the design of the United States government. But one of the key elements that was missing was that in the Confederacy, there was a council of mothers that actually selected the chief. And the chiefs were selected based on their ability to maintain peace, to think long-term, and to think about the well-being of everybody. And if they violated those, then the mothers could step in and replace them. So there was that feminine energy brought in to the system in that way. But that was the one major element that was rejected by the American founding fathers. And not only did women not have the right to vote or have any political voice, they also could not own property or inherit property. Right? So there's a classic exchange between Abigail Adams and John Adams, which we quote in the book, where she says, please remember the ladies and don't give all this power to men, because men want to become tyrants when they are given all that power. And he dismissed her objections and took another 140 or more years, actually, for women to even get the right to vote in this country. So in that sense, it was a hyper-masculine system of government. And if you look at any system in which you have we all have masculine, feminine energies within us, and when they get out of balance, when there's one is completely suppressed, then you go to the unhealthy extreme of the other. And I think that's what happened here. That's why our society became very much characterized by the hyper-masculine. And I think the persistence of slavery to me is a signal of that. This is the only country that had to fight a war to end slavery. All the other countries that had slavery ended it by decree. And there was no big debate about it. It's like, yes, of course. But here, as you know, we fought the bloodiest war in the country's history over that issue. And even when the war was ended, the issue wasn't resolved. It took another century for those things to continue. And to me, that's all, the mature masculine is strength, courage, focus, discipline, discernment, etc. The hyper masculine is domination, aggression, excessive ambition, winning, results at all costs, right? That kind of creates that adversarial energy where everything becomes a battle, everything becomes a war, becomes a jungle. And I think that's what happened in many ways in the political realm. And I think similar things happen in the business realm. Businesses were predominantly run by men, and we were missing the feminine energy there as well. The original ideas for that came from Adam Smith. And in fact, Benjamin Franklin had dinner with Adam Smith in Scotland a few years before he published his book, The Wealth of Nations. A lot of those ideas made their way into that book. So this country was really founded on those ideas of freedom leads to prosperity, and how do we create the conditions where that can happen, and the idea of the invisible hand of the market, that people pursuing their own self-interest would engage in activities that would end up serving each other's needs. But we were missing this critical element of caring. And there too, Adam Smith actually wrote another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments 17 years prior, which was about the human need to care. So the way that I phrase it is that capitalism had a mother and a father, and both were embodied in Adam Smith, because he brought both those energies, the caring energy and then the striving energy of the self-interest, right? And we ignored that energy, as we tend to do in life, right? So we ended up with the purely masculine energy in capitalism as well, which means it's all about my success and achieving what I want to achieve. It's about using people to achieve my goals. And sooner or later, that led to treating workers as disposable, as they didn't really matter, as a cost to be minimized, right? Which then led to terrible working conditions, which then led to militant unions. And ultimately, socialism, communism, Marxism, all of these things arose in response to the excesses of sort of this hyper-masculine, what I would call low consciousness capitalism. So I think those are the two elements that we talk about there. And that's what has led to extraordinary amounts of suffering, right? Because when you treat people in that way, fast forward to today, there are an estimated 120,000 people dying every year because of the way we work, the way we lead, manage, and organize. Their heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays. And there's many, many indicators. Employee engagement is extremely low. Many indicators that the way we work isn't working. It's causing a lot of suffering. And we've created a workplace that feels more like either it feels like a battlefield or it feels like a prison to a lot of people. It doesn't have to be that way. That's what the book is about.
Do you think other countries have included this feminine energy into their organization?
I would say yes, there are some. Scandinavian countries certainly have.
Okay.
A lot of that in there, in the feminine, I don't know if they had it historically or they were arrived at later. I would say Europe is an interesting example of a whole continent that has moved towards that in the last 75, 80 years after the end of World War II, where, European nations fought 1,200 wars with each other until 1946. In 600 years, they fought 1,200 wars with each other. Okay, and since 1946, they have not fought any wars with each other. So they've kind of moved past that, right? And we've seen the rise of what we would call feminine values much more in many of those countries. Again, not uniformly. Switzerland was a laggard. Women did not fully have the right to vote in Switzerland until the 1970s, right? And in terms of all the levels of government. So it's not across the board, but yes, overall there was more there. And there were a few other societies in the world that were more matriarchal or matrilineal. But I would say overall, this is part of the human journey as well. that this is how we have evolved. And we are finally, I would say that this century, you can consider the 19th century, the meta story there was the end of slavery. In the 20th century, the meta story was the end of dictatorships and totalitarianism, especially the communist regimes. The 21st century would be the end of the sidelining of the feminine, the sidelining of women and the suppression of the feminine. Because I do make a distinction, as we all should, between male, female versus masculine, feminine, right? Mm-hmm. Every human being has both energies within them. Right? As Carl Jung said, every man has an inner woman, every woman has an inner man. So we have that, right? And of course, women may have more of the feminine qualities and men may have less inherently, but still we have them both. And it's up to us to cultivate them and bring them in harmony with each other. And that's what we haven't done. I think we're doing more of that this century now.
I would agree. Could you maybe talk a little bit about your the parable of the pothole? I mean, that story is just so moving to me. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the book is, the first part of the book is how did we get here? How did we create all this suffering through work? And kind of gives some dimensions on that suffering. Why is that? Some of it is what I just talked about. There's also another section in there that talks about this whole mindset of empire versus ministry. Most businesses grow the way empires grew in the past, which is through conquest, especially large multinational corporations, right? It was through conquest, right? Through takeover, through wars, as in the case of empires, and lots of suffering, lots of killing, etc. Ultimately, to feed an ego that has a limitless appetite for power and money. And in a way, that's what's now present in the world of business in many ways. So if you look at large corporations, if you look at 3G Capital out of Brazil, that's an example of a company that's growing that way. They come and they acquire a company through a hostile bid. They typically lay off 20-30% of the employees. They put tremendous cost control pressure on every single thing and extremely high profitability targets on all managers with high bonuses if they achieve them. And the only way they do that is by squeezing people, squeezing the life and the blood out of people. Essentially, that's what happens. And that works for a few years at best. And then it falls apart. There's only so far you can go with that way of being. But that's the empire building energy. And then I contrast that with what I call the ministry, spreading a healing ministry. And the example of that is the book I wrote with Bob Chapman, where here's a CEO who has acquired 108 dying and struggling businesses, manufacturing businesses in the industrial Midwest to begin with, and then in Europe and other places as well. And he's turned them all around. He's never sold a single company. And same business, same people, same location, and now those businesses are thriving. Why? Because he put people at the center. And he created a culture where they say we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. Right? And they empowered the people, treated them with respect and dignity, got them to rethink how they did their work, to make the work more effective and efficient, and a bunch of other things that they did culturally. But as I said, 108 companies, never sold a single one. Everybody's thriving. Everybody wins in that way of doing business. And I talked to Bob a couple of years ago, and I asked him, what he was up to, and he's about 75 now. He said he's looking at 8 to 10 acquisitions this year. Mm-hmm. That year when I talked to him, I said, Bob, you already have 108 companies. How many do you need? And you've got 26 grandchildren, right? Like, why aren't you just relaxing and enjoying your life and all this money you've made and all this success you've achieved? And he said, well, Raj, I don't know how much time I have left in this life. And on my deathbed, I will not be proud of the money I made or the machines we built. I will be proud of the lives we touched. Mm-hmm. And I want to touch as many lives as I can before I'm gone. And I said, Bob, you're not growing a business, you're spreading a ministry. Mm-hmm. And it truly is, because if you look at what happens to a company when they get acquired by Barry Wehmiller, those people have a future, their children have a future, those towns have a future. Otherwise, many of those towns are in danger of being wiped off the map, right? So there's an energy there where he feels an obligation to grow, because his way of running a business actually makes life better for people and their families and the customers, communities, everything gets better, right? And I think that's what we should aspire to, right? That when our business grows, more people, it's not just that more people have jobs, right? But actually life gets better and richer and more meaningful for people and for everybody, not just for employees, but for their children, for their families, etc. So that's another sort of message of the first part of the book. And then the second part is about 25 stories of companies that are actually doing things not only to cause less harm, but actually to heal their employees, the children of their employees, communities, customers, the environment, society, etc. So different stories focus on different aspects. And the one that Kim is referring to is, it's called The Parable of the Pothole, and it refers to a company called Apple Tree Answers, which was grown by a person named John Ratliff. It's a call center company. They acquired a bunch of companies and combined them and became, I think, the second largest. And one thing he realized at one point, having built this company, was that there were really two distinct subcultures within the company. So there were the salaried professional employees, college educated, full-time jobs, benefits, etc. And then there were the hourly workers who actually did the work, who answered the phones. And he found that life was very different for them, and their conditions were very different. So the employee turnover was way higher for the hourly, as you would expect. It was about 118% a year compared to somewhere in the teens for the salaried people. And employee engagement was the opposite. It was somewhere in the 60s or 70s for the salaried people, and it was in the low teens for the hourly people. So he realized that there are two distinct cultures here. There needs to do something for the hourly people and to understand why, first of all. I started to ask them simple questions like, what can we do to improve your life and improve your working environment? And every day they tried to ask people to suggest something that they could make better, and they made a lot of those changes. He also started to look at how much they were paid and started to understand the financial challenges of trying to make ends meet on that kind of a job. And at some point he came to realize that people really were struggling. You know, they might have enough to get by, but if something happened, some kind of emergency, it would completely derail their lives. So to illustrate that, he talks about this idea of the pothole. He said, imagine that our CFO is driving to work and her Mercedes hits a pothole and her tire blows out and her rim gets damaged. So she simply pulls over to the side of the road, calls AAA, and the car gets towed away, and then she gets a ride back to the office. Later that afternoon, the car is washed and repaired, and insurance covers most of it, so it shows up at her office. But meanwhile, at the office, everybody is very concerned about her well-being, and they ask her, are you okay? That must have been so scary. Yeah? They're very conciliatory towards her. But it was a non-event in her life. But he said, imagine one of our hourly workers who was driving that same road and hit the same pothole. And in her $800 14-year-old car, and she doesn't have AAA, so she can't just call for the car to be towed away. She has to get a towing company and figure out how to get the car off the road. And she doesn't have $30, $40 that it would take to her to get to work in a cab or an Uber. So she calls around to get a friend to pick her up, and finally shows up at work 3 hours late and is told to go see the supervisor who's waiting for her. And she's issued a reprimand in very harsh terms, and she's given a black mark against her record and told that 2 more of these and you will be fired. And then she's told, now go and be nice to our customers. Because that's her job, to answer the phone and be nice, right? Now her life is falling apart and nobody cares. There's no empathy. She has $160 in the bank. She has no idea how much this is going to cost, probably several times that. She doesn't know how she's going to get to work tomorrow. She doesn't know how she's going to take the kids to school, etc. I mean, the whole thing is devastating, and yet there's no empathy or no sympathy, and certainly no help for her. So it's realizations like that that led John to create a program that they call Dream On. And they said, you know, it's kind of like Make-A-Wish, right? If you have a need, there's something that you really want or you really need, then please let us know, because we'd like to make it happen if we can. Right? So it might be a health emergency, it might be something with your car, whatever it is. Right? We're going to try to help. And so they put that out there, and nothing happened for about a week or more. And you know what? One of the things you realize is that people are really stoic, you know, and they're kind of heroic. They walk around with burdens that would crush us if we only knew what people are dealing with. If you could see a thought bubble over everybody's head. But as I said, people just do their job because they are told they need to be professional and they can't show weakness at work. And, it's not your problem. If they are dealing with things in their life, that's their problem, right? So finally, a week later, they get their first submission on the website, and it comes from a woman who's a full-time employee. And she says, I'm so sorry, but I need help. That my ex-husband stopped paying alimony 2 weeks ago, and a week ago, my 2 kids and I got evicted from our apartment. And I've been living in the car now for the whole week with the 2 kids. And I just can't do it anymore. I don't know what to do. I can't keep them in the car any longer. So I'm so sorry, but I need help. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, this comes across the desk of the CEO, and he reads it, and all he feels is a deep sense of shame. So what kind of a leader am I, and what kind of company am I running, where a full-time employee who's a mother is struggling so badly and can't even tell us. Right. What have I created here? So then, of course, they reached out to her right away, and they got her in a hotel that night, and they helped her get into another apartment, which is never easy, and helped her furnish it and so forth. And they told her, we can keep this confidential. We don't have to let others know if you'd rather. She said, no, this is the best thing anybody has ever done for me. I'm going to tell everybody I know. Nobody has ever been this kind. And she did. And the next thing you know, the floodgates opened and all kinds of suffering came into view. Lots of people dealing with lots of things. And so they started helping people. And they figured out ways that people could help other people. Right? One of the things that I say now is that, there are 2 things that are hiding in the corporate closet. There's all this unexpressed love. We have this need to care. Human beings want to be able to express our caring, right? We would wither away if we could not express love, right? I also say love that is not expressed is like a check that is never cashed. It doesn't do any good for anybody, right? So we need to be able to express that love, but our workplaces don't allow that or encourage that. Right? You're supposed to be professional and business-like. So there's unexpressed love hiding in the corporate closet, and then there's silent suffering. Right? People are dealing with all kinds of challenges. And if only we allow both these things to come out, they are the cure for each other. That gives love a place to go, and that gives suffering a way to heal. And we can replace all that suffering with joy if we allow that. So what happened at this company is that eventually their turnover for the hourly people came down to 15% from 118%, where the industry average is about 150%. Right? Simply by creating a healing, caring environment. And you can imagine the business implications of that. Yeah, it costs them some money to help people, right? But when your turnover is 1/10 of the industry average, you're doing something right, and your business is going to reflect that.
We have a young lady who was just hired by Taco Bell. They own a really high percentage of Taco Bells in like 10 states. And I was like, this is such an exciting opportunity. You can help make these employees' lives better. And I was telling her about the story, this story. And I said, please work to do this. Make this your primary mission. Is to help make the employees' lives better, because they're the ones who take care of the customer, right?
Yeah, and we do it because it's the right thing to do, not just because, obviously all the good things will result from it, right? But it's very important to me that people do this because that's what you do for other human beings, Not simply because, the happy employees are going to result in happy customers, which is going to result in more revenues. Yeah, all of that is true. But if that's your reason for doing it, we need to do the right things for the right reasons, right? So my friend Fred Kaufman uses the analogy, it's like asking somebody to marry you. And if she says, why do you want to marry me? And you say, well, I read a study that married men live 5 years longer and they make 30% more income over their lifetime, right? That's why we're married. Well, that's not going to be a good reason, right? So likewise, the fact that happy employees are more productive and have a better impact on customers is true, but it shouldn't be our reason for doing it. Right. People deserve to be happy, period. We should do everything we can to make that happen.
Do any of you have a question for Raj? Oh, Allison?
Hello, Raj. I'm interested in your thoughts around how you get businesses to recognize what you were speaking about. So I'm completely with you that we need a human-centered way of being in business. I just struggle a lot to get my clients to see this sort of approach as being real and worthwhile. And even if one's sharing the perspective that Kimberly had brought up about it helps the bottom line, and as you're saying, that shouldn't be the motivation. But even going from that motivation of it helps the bottom line, there's so much resistance. So without that, I'm really interested in your thoughts.
Well, you know, if you've got a leader who's not a sociopath, okay, which is not a given, okay, the way that we have organized business and created the culture of business actually results in a high percentage of people with the sociopathic personality type to be promoted into leadership. It's about, the last study I saw was 20% of executives, which is the same percentage you find in a high security prison, by the way. You know, overall in society, we find it at 1%, but in executive suites and high security prisons, it's 20%. So we have a system which rewards sociopathic behavior, which has only focus on the numbers, don't care about the impact you have on people, right? You have no empathy for that. So if that's not the case, then I think one of the ways in which this can, you know, you have to awaken that that sense in the leaders. As James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I think if we were to hold up a mirror and say there is deep and real suffering going on in this organization, and here's the form it takes, right? People are suffering. People are suffering because life is difficult anyway. Life is filled with challenges outside of work. And we can't insulate ourselves from that. We bring that to work. And secondly, our work, the way we work and the way we lead, manage, organize, and supervise and boss people adds to that greatly. So if we were to be able to get an audit of what kind of suffering there is, how people are struggling and suffering, right? I think that's a starting point, you know, to say there are things that we can do to alleviate this. There are things that we can do to help people. So it's an awakening. The subtitle of the book is Awakening the Conscience of Business, right? When you understand or when you realize that you are actually causing suffering because of the way in which you're running your business, then if you are a feeling human being, your conscience should be awakened, and then you would want to be doing something. And that's where this book comes in, because it inspires people with actual stories of actual companies that are doing so many different things. You know, a company can pick up this book and get 10 ideas for what they can actually implement right away, most of which don't cost them anything. And even if they do cost, they have a huge benefit that's disproportionate to that, right? So, and beyond that, I'm interested in other people's thoughts, because I think that's, to me, it is about awakening the conscience. And it's about also telling people that it's not that, you know, the managers might say, or leaders, I've got enough problems of my own, and I don't have the emotional bandwidth all the time to be able to absorb all this other pain, right? And we say it's not about that. It's about, as I said, it's about releasing that caring that everybody has, and about the suffering that everybody also has, and letting that come into the open. And people will help each other. All you need to do is get out of the way. And sometimes you have to do something as well. But create an environment in which people feel safe and people to be vulnerable in front of each other, and they have not only permission but actually role modeling to care for each other, right? And I think that takes on a momentum of its own after that.
Do you believe we're at a tipping point where people do want to create healing organizations?
Well, the book only came out a month ago, so I can't say that we're at a tipping point by any means. I would say that, you know, the world of business is moving slowly towards, I've been part of the conscious capitalism movement for 11 years, right? So this is just an extension of that. way of thinking. This is my, I think, sixth book in the realm of conscious. You mentioned Firms of Endearment, and there was Conscious Capitalism and Everybody Matters, all of these things, right? So we are gradually moving in that direction. I think companies are now starting to focus on higher purpose, which is one of our pillars. And the second is stakeholder orientation, and we're now starting to see the business roundtable, for example, adopt language around that, right? So what used to be considered somewhat radical ideas, that the purpose of business is not profit, it's actually a purpose separate from profit, and profits are a way to enable that. And some of these ideas are starting to become accepted and even moving towards the mainstream, but we're still a long way from that, I think. So this is a journey, you know, and we're at the far end of highlighting businesses whose consciousness has gone to that level. Many others are far behind, but I think it's moving in that direction, definitely. So I don't think there's a tipping point to become a healing organization yet, but there is probably a tipping point to change the narrative of business from being profit-maximizing, shareholder-centered view to a purpose-driven, stakeholder-oriented view. I think we're closer to that tipping point, and that's a necessary step. You know, that's what we call the adjacent possible, and then from there you can go further. It's very hard to be a healing organization if you're only about profit maximization. Right? We're going to do that. Okay, well, I encourage you to get the book. I think you'll enjoy it. You know, your most recent book is often your favorite, but actually this particular one actually is one that I was deeply, deeply invested in. I feel like this book was, to me, the sort of culmination of this 15-year journey of evolving business in this way. So,
Raj, what would you say, if I could just ask you one more question about going through change? How could you, like a big change process, how could an organization show that they are a healing organization through that?
You know, we just had our Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit, and this idea was introduced there. The whole theme was business as healing, and by the end of 2 days, everybody is talking about healing organizations like it's a, you know, it's a natural thing. So the language rolls off people's tongues. Right? They said, we want to become a healing organization. Sure, I can understand that. So if the leaders start using the language and then start to make it real, which means tell us ways in which we are not a healing organization today. Where are we causing unnecessary? I say this is all about removing unnecessary suffering. It's not about saying that life will never have suffering in it. No, suffering is part of life. But can we take away unnecessary suffering, which serves no higher purpose? Because there's some kinds of suffering that serves a higher purpose, right? So when we get people to point out ways in which we are today causing suffering, and then you start to address those one by one, you know, then you have a very tangible. It needs to come from the top. The CEO needs to advocate for this, talk about this, use this in their language about the business, and then create conditions where people surface these practices and have permission to change them, and then celebrate those. Right? Start celebrating ways in which we're doing that. So I say it's about reducing suffering, it's about elevating joy, and it's about promoting healthy growth throughout the organization.
Amen. Oh, thank you so much, Raj.
Okay, thank you. Okay, nice to meet all of you. Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for your time. Bye.
Thank you for sharing. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.